Guys, hope you're well. I'm back with another video on Python. Today I want to teach you about mock library, and yeah, let's jump in and understand mock. So a little bit of introduction, right? So now if you're writing any code, you'll also write unit tests, right? So that makes sense, right? So you'll also write unit tests. So of course, if you're a DBA or a sysadmin, then we're not used to writing test cases and unit tests and things like that. We kind of like test things spontaneously per se. But if you're writing Python programs, you will write unit tests. So of course, in your programs, in your Python scripts, sometimes you will query databases. I mean, you will first connect to the database and then you will query it. Sometimes you will connect to an API. Sometimes you will, you can call an API, get some response, do something with it, right? Sometimes you will like import some library that's not written by you, like it could belong to another team, or it could be like an open source library, and so on. So you're doing some of these things in your program sometimes. So when you're writing unit tests, you need to, of course, when you're testing those either API calls or database calls, it's not always possible to make those calls successfully in the environment where your code is running. Actually, your test code is running, right? So for example, if you're running some tests on your local laptop, it might not have access to the production APIs, right? Suppose your code is running on some like Jenkins master node or some CI/CD pipeline, which is like basically running your tests. So I want to actually first show you the function that we are going to write unit test for. First, actually, of course, we need a name for our function, right? And we're going to do a few things. So we are assuming that, or for this purpose, actually, let's assume that we are querying an Oracle database, right? An Oracle database. Okay, so you need, of course, you need the username, password, and of course, you need the TNS, or basically the address, the TNS address of the database you want to connect to, right? So I've like created a dummy TNS string or a connection string, right? So now let's say let me show you how a call like that looks, right? So here I'm using this package called CX Oracle, which is like the Oracle connector package, and using which you can you can make use of this cursor function, execute function, and fetch all to basically run the query that you want, right? And we are passing that query as a parameter and as an argument to this function, right? So now then this is going to return return something, and then we are capturing that in this variable, right? So that query will return something. And if you're not familiar with the format that this will return the output in, so it will be something like this, right? So it will return a tuple. Like, if you have a query, like for example, so let me create a comment section, right? So if you run a query like select id comma name from some table, like let's say orders table, and if you pass this query into this function, and the function is basically, we're using CX Oracle library to connect to the database, and it's going to send this query to the database, and we're making a cursor, we're executing it, and we're fetching the result set and so on. Your output could look like this. It will be sort of like a tuple, and let's say it returns 1 and some name, actually, like let's say Tom, right? So it returns a bunch of tuples like this. Okay, so and that's just to explain like how this package works. But obviously, like, I have not installed Oracle, and I don't think this REPL.it gives you the ability. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, so we're going to switch to my local laptop, because I want to be able to run unit tests from command line, and I cannot do that in my REPL.it IDE. Okay, so let me minimize this, and I want to show you the same program, but like slightly added a few things, right? So here you can see that I'm importing this main package called unit test, and I'm importing mock. So this mock also comes along with this unit test package, right? It used to be that like we have to install mock separately before a certain Python version, I think Python 3.3. Now it comes along with the unit test package, so that's good. Now I'm also importing a specific timeout function, right? A timeout, sort of like an exception, and I'll explain why I'm doing that. Okay, and then we have this function where we have the same things, but I kind of like enclosed this main database call into a try except statement, right? So now if you see, like, I'm doing something like this, right? So if I'm actually querying the database, then I need to import this CX Oracle package and so on. But we know that, like, we are trying to mock things in this unit test, right? We're not really connecting to anything. And you might have seen other examples where people are mocking an API call, but we're not doing that. We're mocking a database call, right? So I don't need to import the CX Oracle package. All I need to do is this package is going to be mocked in this way, right? So because we imported this mock object, right, from this unit test.mock, right? So, and then you can create an instance of mock like this, and then we are naming it CX Oracle, right? Now mock has this ability to dynamically create objects. So let me tell you what I mean. Let me explain. So I'm just going to import mock from this unit test, right? Now here, going back, I'm importing, and I'm going to do something now. So I'm going to create an instance of this mock, right, like that. So now if you do a type of m, so that's actually a mock object, we know that. Now this is just a dummy object, and let's say if I want to, like, just check if this variable exists. Say it dynamically created a variable called name, or an attribute called name, in this mock instance. So m is the instance of this mock object. So let's say if I want to try executing a method which is part of this mock object called a random call, and you can see that that did not fail. It basically created a dummy or a mock random call, right? It's not doing anything. So this mock package has the ability to create attributes and methods dynamically, right? So you don't need to worry about like how this all these things are mocked underneath. All you need to do is create a mock instance, and you can basically do anything with that instance, right? Now coming back to our sample code, our example code, so we have a bunch of attributes, database attributes like user, password, and connection string, and we are making a call like this, but we have actually initialized the CX Oracle as a mock instance. So now whatever I do here, it's all mock, right? It's all being mocked. So we're not really connecting to a database and executing a query, so it's all being mocked. So this is how your so this is how you mock things in your unit test actually. So I've actually got this try except section for a particular reason, right? So now if you're not familiar with writing unit tests in Python, this is how it looks like. You would write a class and you name it whatever, and you basically inherit this test case, unit test.test case from our package, unit test package, right? And then you write a bunch of tests actually. So this is a separate test, this is a separate test. So what does this test do, right? So now I've got like a query, and it looks like a real query, and then we are calling so we're not calling actually, we're saying that I want this mock call to return a list of tuples that looks like this, because I've got only max ID, just one column, so it's only one column. I want it to look like this, and I want it to return 100, right? So I've got that right here, and now I've got this assert equal method, which is part of this test case class, right? So I've got this assert equal, right? And I'm calling this query database function, which is this function. And just about that, I told unit test to return whatever I want, right? And I'm comparing with basically the result. So you can see that this call will give you something like this, like a list of tuples, a list of this tuple actually, 100 comma. And then if you notice here, this function itself will take whatever it gets from here, and then it will get the first tuple and then the first value in the first tuple, which is 100. So when I call this query database function, I am expecting 100 actually, which is what this function is supposed to return, right? I'm checking whether this is happening. So that is actually a typical unit test, right? Now, so I'm using, if you noticed actually, what's all this? This is basically all that is coming from here. So I'm mocking all these things, and then I'm using an attribute called return value. So this is from here to here, it's the same thing. You can see CX Oracle connect, cursor, execute, and fetch all. Same thing, CX Oracle connect, cursor, execute, and fetch all. And I want this fetch all function to return this. So that's what I'm putting over here. And then immediately I make a call to that function, and then the function works the way I want, right? And then I'm checking whether it really returned 100, right? This function really returned 100. So return value is something that you can use, right? And that is actually a mock parameter, a mock instance attribute. And so that is one way you can mock a database call. So this is a database call and I mocked it to return 100, right? And I'm checking using this assert equal to see if the function works the way I want, right? Now my second test, if you look at it, there is a slight change. Here I've given a list of values, right? So first time it's going to return a list of a list of tuples, like in this case only one tuple, and the second is just a timeout. A timeout is what I imported. It's kind of like an exception, so it is like mimicking a database timeout, right? Let's imagine that your database is having some issues and now we are getting timeouts from like your queries are hanging and they're timing out, right? So now actually I've got like a couple of statements here, print statements, just to show you which part of the code is getting executed. But anyway, so here instead of return value, I'm using an attribute called side effect, a mock attribute, and I've given a list of values that should be returned for each call. So the first time I called query database, and this is similar to what we saw in the previous test, so it's going to return this and then we'll get 100, right? This will return, so this is going to return this, and it eventually when it gets here it's going to return just the first value, which is this, and then the first value in the tuple, which is 100, right? Now the second time it's going to time out, so that's what I'm checking over here. So assert equal, assert races, all these are unit test methods you can use to check whether a particular call is returning a value that you expect, right? Or basically you can use a variety of functions. So assert equal is basically what it is, right? I want this call to return 100 first, and then second time I want to check if an exception is raised when this call is made. And of course timeout is a kind of an exception, so it should go through, right? Because the second time timeout is what we get, and then it validates the check. So now let's actually go ahead and execute this unit test Python program, right? So I'm already here. I'm just going to execute it, Python, and I've named it query db test, and you can see that the first time query got executed, okay, and that's it, because that's just the first test, and it totally ran two tests. That makes sense because there's only two tests I've got in this class, right? So if you guys need more clarity and explanation of on how to write unit tests, actually do let me know in the comments. I will make a video to teach basically how to write unit tests, right? So you have two functions, two tests, and that's what is running here, right? So first time I want this thing to return 100 whatever, and then it returns the value 100, so that is validated, so that is verified. The second time I wanted to do side effect, which is basically a list of return values to be returned by this particular call. So first it returns 100, and that's actually a check and a timeout. So timeout is this guy. So a timeout is also working because the second call, this call, will return a timeout. And is it an exception? Yes. So assert races exception. So that's basically two tests and basically mocking a database call, right? So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so that's what I wanted to teach you today, and I'll be back with another video on Python. Please comment, subscribe, like my channel, hit the bell icon, and share my videos on your Facebook and LinkedIn profiles. Okay, all right, thank you guys, I'll see you next time.